I'm a highway patrol officer. My eyes saw a tired family, but my dashcam saw rotting corpses smiling at me. I am parked directly under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent canopy of a 24-hour fuel station. I have locked all 4 doors. I have the engine running, the heater turned on high, and all the interior lights illuminated. I am surrounded by concrete and artificial light, and I still cannot stop my hands from shaking against the steering wheel. I am a county law enforcement officer. I have only been on the force for 2 years, but I have built a reputation for being strict, thorough, and completely reliant on protocol. I like rules. I like guidelines. In this line of work, the manual is your best tool. If you follow the steps, if you run the plates, if you approach the vehicle at the correct angle, you eliminate variables, and maintain control of the situation. My assigned patrol sector is a massive, desolate stretch of a 2-lane county highway. It is a lonely, isolated assignment. The road runs along the eastern perimeter of a massive, deep freshwater lake. The layout of the geography means there is absolutely nothing out there. On the left side of the highway, there is a steep, rocky embankment that drops directly down into the dark water of the lake. On the right side, there is an endless, dense expanse of thick pine forest. There are no houses, no streetlights, and no intersecting roads for over 40 miles. It is just a ribbon of dark asphalt trapped between the deep woods and the deep water. I work the graveyard shift. I patrol this highway from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. Usually, the entire 8-hour shift consists of driving back and forth in complete silence, listening to the hum of my tires, and the occasional crackle of the dispatch radio. Sometimes I pull over a long-haul trucker who missed a turn, or a local teenager driving too fast. It is a quiet, predictable job. Tonight started exactly like every other night. The weather was clear but very cold. A thick layer of fog was rolling off the surface of the lake, creeping over the embankment and drifting across the asphalt. I was cruising at 40 miles per hour, holding a cup of lukewarm coffee, scanning the dark road ahead with my headlights. At approximately 2:15 a.m., I saw a vehicle driving a few miles ahead of me. I sped up slightly to close the distance. It was a dark-colored minivan, an older model. It was traveling well under the speed limit, moving at maybe 30 miles per hour. As I got closer, I noticed 2 things. First, the passenger side taillight was completely burned out. Second, the vehicle was swerving. It was not a violent, erratic swerve, but a slow, drifting weave. The tires drifted over the solid yellow line in the center of the road, corrected slowly, and then drifted back over the white shoulder line near the edge of the lake embankment. Protocol for this is clear. A burned out taillight is a minor traffic violation, but combined with the swerving, it establishes reasonable suspicion for driving under the influence or extreme driver fatigue. I had to initiate a traffic stop. I pulled up behind the minivan, keeping a safe distance of 3 car lengths. I reached down to the center console and flipped the switch from my overhead emergency lights. The flashing red and blue strobes instantly illuminated the dark highway, reflecting off the thick pine trees on the right and cutting through the fog drifting off the lake on the left. The driver of the minivan reacted slowly. It took them nearly a quarter of a mile to register the lights in their rearview mirror. Eventually, the right turn signal blinked and the van slowly pulled over onto the narrow gravel shoulder, coming to a stop just a few feet away from the steep drop-off into the water. I pulled my cruiser onto the shoulder behind them. I followed my training exactly. I offset my vehicle slightly to the left, creating a safety corridor between my cruiser and the flow of traffic. I angled my front wheels toward the road, so if a drunk driver rear-ended my cruiser, it would not be pushed forward into the minivan. I put the transmission in park, unbuckled my seatbelt, and grabbed my heavy metal flashlight. I stepped out into the cold night air. The only sounds were the low rumble of the two idling engines, the crunch of the gravel under my boots, and the faint, rhythmic lapping of the lake water hitting the rocks at the bottom of the embankment. I walked up to the rear of the minivan. I reached out with my left hand and firmly pressed my palm against the trunk lid. This is another standard protocol. You leave your fingerprints on the vehicle. If something happens to you, the investigators will have physical proof that you were standing right behind that specific car. The metal of the trunk felt unusually cold and damp. I walked up the driver's side, keeping my flashlight pointed low. I stopped just behind the driver's side window, angling my body so I was not an easy target if the driver decided to open the door aggressively. I tapped the glass with my flashlight. The window rolled down manually with a squeaking sound. I shined the beam of my flashlight into the interior of the van. It was a perfectly normal family. The driver was a middle-aged woman. She looked incredibly exhausted. Her hair was messy, and there were dark, heavy bags under her eyes. She squinted against the glare of my flashlight. Sitting in the passenger seat was a middle-aged man. He was wearing a plaid flannel shirt. His head was tilted back against the headrest, his eyes closed, lightly snoring. He looked completely relaxed. I moved the beam of the flashlight to the back seat. There were two young children, a boy and a girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old. They were both fast asleep, their heads leaning against the cold glass of the side windows. There was a pile of blankets and pillows shoved between them. It looked exactly like a family pushing through the final, exhausting hours of a long road trip. "Good evening, ma'am," I said, keeping my voice polite but firm. "I am stopping you tonight because your passenger side taillight is completely out, and I noticed you were having some trouble maintaining your lane." The woman rubbed her face with a tired hand. "I am so sorry, officer," she said. Her voice was quiet and hoarse. "We have been driving for a very long time. We just wanted to get there before morning. I guess I am more tired than I realized." "It happens," I replied. "But driving exhausted on this stretch of highway is dangerous, especially this close to the water. I need to see your license, registration, and proof of insurance, please." She nodded slowly. She reached across the sleeping man in the passenger seat, opened the glove compartment, and pulled out a small stack of papers. She handed them to me along with a plastic driver's license. When her fingers brushed against mine, her skin felt freezing cold. It felt like touching a piece of ice. "I am going to take these back to my cruiser and run your information," I told her. "I will be right back. Please remain in the vehicle." She did not say anything. She just gave me a slow, tired nod and looked straight ahead through the windshield. I turned around and walked back to my cruiser. I climbed into the driver's seat, pulled the heavy door shut, and placed the license and registration on the center console. I turned on the overhead dome light so I could read the small print. I picked up my radio microphone. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I am initiating a traffic stop on a dark-colored minivan, requesting a plate check." The radio crackled. The dispatcher on duty tonight was an older woman who usually worked the quiet shifts. "Copy that, Unit 4. Go ahead with the plate number." I read the alphanumeric sequence off the registration paper. "Copy," she replied. "Stand by. The system is running a little slow tonight." I put the microphone down. I settled back into the seat, enjoying the warm air blowing from the heater vents. The heavy protocol of the stop was complete. Now, I just had to wait for the computer system to verify the documents, write a simple warning ticket for the broken taillight, and advise the tired mother to pull over and rest. While I waited, I glanced down at my center console. Mounted directly below the radio is a small, heavy-duty monitor. It displays the live video feed from the cruiser's dashboard camera. The camera records continuously during a traffic stop, capturing everything that happens directly in front of my vehicle. The video is strictly black and white, designed to capture high contrast details like license plates in low light conditions. Out of pure, ingrained habit, I looked at the monitor to ensure the camera was recording the minivan. I stopped breathing. The image displayed on the small screen was wrong. It was entirely, fundamentally wrong. I looked at the screen, and my brain struggled to process the visual information. The camera was pointed directly at the space in front of my cruiser. The red and blue strobe lights were flashing across the scene in alternating waves of bright white and deep black. The vehicle on the monitor was not the minivan I had just walked away from. The van on the screen was crushed. The roof was caved entirely inward, bending the metal frame down toward the seats. The rear bumper was twisted and hanging off by a single rusted bolt. The exterior was completely covered in thick, dark, hanging layers of aquatic algae and river weeds. The tires were flat, rotting, and half buried in thick mud. It looked exactly like a vehicle that had been pulled from the bottom of a lake after decades underwater. But that was not the part that made my blood turn to ice. The dashboard camera was positioned directly behind the rusted, crushed rear window of the van. The glass was shattered. Looking out through the broken back window, staring directly into the lens of the dashboard camera, were 4 faces. They were bloated. They were skeletal. The flesh on their faces was gray, peeling away from the bone in wet, ragged strips. Their eye sockets were empty, dark, hollow pits filled with stagnant water. They were pressed tightly together in the back of the crushed vehicle. The mother, the father, the 2 children. They were all looking directly at the camera, and they were smiling. It was not a natural expression. Their jawbones were pulled back, stretching the rotting, waterlogged skin into wide, unnatural, gaping grins. They were completely motionless, suspended in the grainy black and white feed, just staring and smiling at the lens. A wave of suffocating panic slammed into my chest. My hands gripped the edges of the monitor so hard my knuckles turned white. I thought the camera system was malfunctioning. I tore my eyes away from the screen and looked up through my windshield. Parked 20 feet in front of me was the pristine, dark-colored minivan. The metal was clean. The roof was perfectly intact. The red glow of the functional brake light illuminated the gravel shoulder. Through the back window, I could see the silhouette of the 2 children sleeping peacefully under their blankets. I could see the mother looking into her side mirror, watching my cruiser. Everything was perfectly normal. I looked back down at the monitor. The crushed, rusted, algae-covered wreckage was still there. The 4 rotting skeletal corpses were still there. They had moved. The mother had raised her hand. A skeletal, bloated arm, covered in peeling wet skin and thick green weeds, was pressed against the shattered glass of the rear window. She was tapping on the glass from the inside. I could not hear the tapping through the heavy doors of my cruiser, but I could see the bone of her finger hitting the lens on the screen. Tap, tap, tap. They were still smiling that wide, gaping, impossible grin. I felt dizzy. I reached forward with a shaking hand and physically hit the side of the monitor, hoping to reset the feed. The screen flickered, but the image remained. The bloated corpses continued to stare. Suddenly, the radio crackled loudly, breaking the heavy silence in the cruiser. "Unit 4, this is dispatch," the older woman's voice said. She sounded deeply confused. Her professional tone had completely slipped. I grabbed the microphone, fumbling with the cord. "Unit 4, go ahead." I ran the plates and the license. She said slowly, "Are you absolutely sure you read that sequence correctly? Are you sure you are looking at a dark minivan?" "Yes," I stammered, my eyes darting between the pristine van out the windshield and the nightmare on the screen. "I am parked right behind it. Why?" "The system flagged the registration," the dispatcher said. "Those plates belong to a vehicle that was involved in a major missing persons case 30 years ago." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Missing? A family of 4, she read from her screen. "They were driving cross country. They were last seen at a gas station near your current location. The police searched for weeks. The primary theory was that the driver fell asleep at the wheel and the vehicle went off the embankment into the lake. They never found the car. They never found the bodies. The license you gave me belongs to the mother. Her status is listed as legally dead." The radio went silent. I sat completely frozen in the driver's seat. The heater was blowing hot air onto my face, but I was shivering uncontrollably. I slowly raised my head and looked through the windshield. The pristine minivan was gone. It had not driven away. I had not heard the engine start. I had not heard the tires crunching on the gravel. The red brake light was simply gone. The space in front of my cruiser was completely empty. I reached up and engaged the mechanical lever for the high-powered spotlight mounted on the driver's side pillar. I twisted the handle, aiming the bright beam of light directly at the patch of gravel where the van had been parked seconds ago. There were no tire tracks. Instead, covering the gravel shoulder was a massive puddle of thick, black, stagnant water. The water was actively bubbling, seeping quickly into the dirt. A horrible, foul smell began to enter the air vents of my cruiser. It smelled like dead fish, rotting wood, and ancient, stagnant mud. I looked down at the dashboard monitor. The screen was displaying a live feed of the empty gravel shoulder and the puddle of water. The crushed van was gone. The corpses were gone. I dropped the radio microphone onto the passenger seat. I could barely grab the gear shift. I needed to put the cruiser in drive. I needed to turn around and drive away from the lake as fast as the engine would allow. Protocol did not matter anymore. I just needed to leave. I grabbed the gear shift and pulled it down into drive. Before my foot could touch the accelerator, the entire patrol cruiser violently lurched. It was a massive, concussive impact that originated from the right side of the vehicle. The heavy metal frame of the Ford Explorer groaned under the sudden stress. My head snapped to the right, hitting the headrest. The cruiser was moving. It was being dragged sideways. Something was pulling the 2-ton police vehicle across the gravel shoulder, dragging it directly toward the steep embankment that dropped into the black water of the lake. I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal. The powerful engine roared, the RPM needle jumping into the red. The rear tires spun frantically, kicking up a massive cloud of gravel, dirt, and mud. The tires screamed, trying to find traction on the loose shoulder, but the sideways momentum was too strong. We were sliding toward the edge. I turned my head and looked out the passenger side window. The lake was churning. The dark, flat surface of the water was boiling, sending thick, white foam crashing against the rocks. Rising out of the freezing black water were 4 figures. It was the family. The mother, the father, the 2 children. But they were not human anymore. They were the bloated, skeletal, rotting corpses from the camera monitor. Their flesh was gray and peeling. Their empty eye sockets stared blankly at my cruiser. Their jaws were unhinged, locked into that wide, horrific grin. They were suspended in the air. Attached to the back of each rotting corpse was a massive, thick, muscular appendage. They looked like dark, wet, glistening tentacles, thicker than tree trunks, emerging from the deep water of the lake. The tentacles were fused directly into the spines of the corpses, using the dead human bodies like fleshy, rotting puppets. The tentacles extended from the lake, reaching up the rocky embankment. The rotting puppet corpses of the family were pressed directly against the side of my cruiser. Their bloated, skeletal hands were gripping the window frames, the door handles, the wheel wells. The strength of the appendages was impossible. They were dragging the heavy police cruiser sideways through the deep gravel, inch by agonizing inch, pulling me closer to the drop-off. The smell of the stagnant water and the rotting flesh was overwhelming, filling the cabin of the cruiser. The metal doors buckled inward under the crushing pressure of the tentacles. The passenger side window shattered, spraying tiny cubes of safety glass across the front seat. One of the bloated, rotting arms reached through the broken window. The skeletal fingers, dripping with thick lake mud, grabbed the fabric of my passenger seat, pulling the cruiser harder toward the cliff. The rear tires of my cruiser slipped over the edge of the embankment. The back of the vehicle dropped violently, the undercarriage slamming against the sharp rocks. My stomach dropped. I was angled upward, staring at the night sky. The black water of the lake was churning wildly just a few feet below my rear bumper. I had exactly 1 second before the center of gravity shifted completely and the cruiser tumbled backward into the deep water. I grabbed the steering wheel with both hands, locked my elbows, and slammed my heavy police boot completely down on the accelerator pedal. The engine screamed, pushing maximum torque to the all-wheel drive system. The front tires, still gripping the solid asphalt of the highway lane, bit down hard. The rubber burned against the road, filling the air with thick white smoke. For a terrifying, agonizing second, the cruiser held completely stationary, suspended in a brutal tug-of-war between the horsepower of the engine and the crushing strength of the tentacles in the lake. The metal frame groaned. The engine whined. Then, the front tires caught traction. The cruiser violently jerked forward. The sudden, explosive forward momentum ripped the vehicle out of the grip of the rotting corpses. I heard a wet, sickening tearing sound as the skeletal hands gripping the window frame were physically ripped away from the tentacles. The cruiser launched forward, climbing over the edge of the embankment and slamming hard onto the flat asphalt of the highway. The rear tires caught the road, propelling the vehicle forward like a missile. I did not let off the gas pedal. I kept my foot floored. I looked in the rearview mirror. The massive, wet tentacles were writhing on the gravel shoulder, aggressively slapping the ground where my cruiser had just been. The rotting bodies of the family dangled limply from the ends of the appendages. As I sped away, the thing slowly pulled the tentacles back down the embankment, dragging the skeletal puppets beneath the black, churning surface of the lake, disappearing without a splash. I drove at over 110 miles per hour down the county highway. I did not turn on my sirens. I did not radio dispatch to tell them what happened. I just drove, staring straight ahead, gripping the wheel until my hands went numb. I did not stop until I saw the bright, artificial canopy of this fuel station. I pulled under the lights and threw the cruiser into park. I have been sitting here ever since. I have checked the passenger side of my vehicle. The window is completely shattered. The heavy metal doors are deeply dented, crushed inward by a massive circular pressure. Sitting on the passenger seat, resting amidst the broken glass, are 3 severed skeletal fingers, completely coated in thick, foul-smelling lake mud. I am not going back to the station. I am leaving the keys in the ignition and I am walking away from this job. I do not care about the rules anymore. I am writing this on my phone and posting it here as a direct warning to anyone driving alone at night. If you are traveling down a desolate highway near a large body of deep water and you see a vehicle driving slowly, drifting over the lines, trying to get your attention, do not stop. Do not pull over to help them. The next one. My grandmother told me a scary bedtime story. Years later, I found out that the story she told me was horrifyingly true. I watched from a distance while my grandma and grandpa fished on their lake in the backyard. But one thing confused me while grandpa cast his line and watched his rod, waiting for the anticipating tug of a fish. Grandma's gaze remained fixed across the lake, her head tilted intently towards the dark fringe of woods. I never saw her look at the bobbing lures. She didn't even seem interested in fishing at all. I thought that maybe she just simply enjoyed looking at the trees. But a nagging feeling persisted. There was more to her gaze than a simple love for nature. It was summer break, and I decided to spend it at my grandparents' house in Knoxville, Tennessee. They lived in a 2-story house, recently built in 2018. It connected directly to a lake, with a dock jutting out on the far right side where my grandpa kept his bass boat. My grandparents were a sweet and quiet couple. They kept to themselves most of the time, living a peaceful life in their little corner of the world. Every summer, though, my visits became a tradition. Grandma's invitation was always an automatic yes, her warm smile and gentle voice a beacon calling me back. There were countless things to love about my grandma, her kindness and generosity at the top of the list. If I wanted something, it was usually an automatic yes from her too. But one of the things I truly cherished most was her stories. Unlike Grandpa, who mostly stuck to tales of his time in the military, exciting stories filled with bravery and adventure, of course, Grandma was a bottomless well of stories. Whether it was a funny story from her childhood, a heartwarming story about a kind neighbor, or a fantastical bedtime story that transported me to magical lands, Grandma always had one on hand. She was one of those special grandmas who could weave a story from thin air, her words painting vivid pictures in my mind. Grandpa, on the other hand, was a man of few words. A quiet strength emanated from him, and the stories he did tell were always about his service. He'd talk about the places he'd been, the challenges he'd faced, and the lessons he'd learned. While not as fantastical as Grandma's stories, they held a different kind of magic, a testament to his resilience and the experiences that shaped him. One of the things I always admired about Grandpa was his outdoor skills. He'd tell me most of his knowledge came from his military training, jokingly saying they prepared him for anything. He was a true outdoorsman, the kind of person I'd trust implicitly if we were ever lost in the wilderness. He knew everything about fishing, the best spots on the lake, the best techniques to catch different types of fish. Some of my favorite memories were spent on his boat, cutting through the cool morning water, the sun rising over the horizon, and the gentle hum of the motor, a comforting lullaby. Every night, Grandma dipped into her seemingly endless well of stories. I never quite understood how she did it. Her mind was like a sprawling library, shelves overflowing with stories to tell. One night, she'd tell me a story of brave knights seeking vengeance, their swords gleaming in the sun. Another night, she'd tell me a story of a land shimmering with magic spells and cursed lands. Then there were the scary stories. Now, Grandma usually avoided them. She knew how they affected me. But the thing about those stories was the detail. Oh man, the detail. They were so vivid, so real. It felt like I was peeking through a crack into another world. A world where the monsters and creatures she described lurked. A world so terrifying that I felt like falling through that crack would kill me. Every night was the same routine. Nestled under a patchwork quilt in the guest room, I'd wait with bated breath. The soft click of the doorknob was my cue. Grandma, her face etched with a lifetime of stories, would enter, a gentle smile gracing her lips. She'd pull up a rocking chair, its rhythmic creak adding to the lullaby effect. Then, in a warm voice, she'd begin telling me a story. One night though, tucked under the patchwork quilt, I waited for Grandma's nightly visit. The soft click of the doorknob announced her arrival. "Ready for another story?" she asked, her voice a warm rumble. I nodded eagerly. Nights at Grandma's were journeys to magical lands, each story more thrilling than the last. But tonight, I craved a different kind of story, a different kind of excitement. "Can you tell me a scary story tonight, Grandma?" I blurted out. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, followed by a thoughtful pause. Unlike her usual repertoire of action-packed adventures, her stories have always steered clear of scary ones. She sat beside me on the patchwork quilt, her usual mischievous eyes replaced by a thoughtful gaze. Her eyes flickered towards the window for a moment before returning to me. Then, with a gentle smile, she began. "Those woods outside your window," she started, her voice a warm rumble. I instinctively glanced towards the window, the familiar silhouette of the trees outlined across the lake. "There's something in those woods," she continued, her voice dropping to a hushed whisper. A shiver danced down my spine, though the room remained pleasantly warm. Those simple words made me so uncomfortable that I was tempted to just tell Grandma to stop, but the truth was, I was hooked. Grandma did tell me scary stories on rare occasions, but they were always fictional, completely disconnected from the real world. She continued, "Every 7 years, it comes out of those woods. It emerges, a creature that's been on this earth for thousands of years. It crawls on all fours. It hunts, a silent predator searching for its prey." I began to tense up a little. The room remained quiet, but the air felt heavy. "Its body is like a man, but twisted and contorted," she murmured, "and its limbs elongated, reaching out at odd angles. Its skin is black as coal, making it difficult to spot during the night." I swallowed hard, my eyes instinctively drawn back to the window. The trees, once comforting, now seemed to writhe with unseen shadows. "But the worst part," she continued, her voice barely a tremor, "is its eyes. Multiple eyes scattered across its head like a spider. They pierce the darkness, searching for an unsuspecting victim." She continued, her voice a hushed whisper, sending shivers down my spine. "Sometimes, if it has trouble finding prey, it ventures closer, closer to houses, searching for unlocked windows." My breath caught in my throat. The image of eyes peering through the glass sent a jolt of terror through me. If it finds an opening, she murmured, it will crawl inside and snatch the closest person to it, dragging them back to the woods. I squeezed my eyes shut. The warmth of the quilt, a poor barrier against the sudden chill. It keeps its victims alive for 7 long years, she whispered, feeding off them slowly until the hunger returns and it's time to hunt once more. My grip tightened on the blanket and my knuckles were white. A cold sweat was dripping down my skin. But don't you worry, she said, her voice gentling. As long as we keep the windows locked, we'll be safe. And don't forget to do the same at your mom's house. She rose from the quilt, her smile strained at the edges. A smile meant to reassure, but one that couldn't hide the sliver of unease in her eyes. Her movements seemed slow and deliberate as she walked towards the window. My eyes followed her, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. She stared out of the window for a moment, as if checking to make sure the thing wasn't around, and then she checked to make sure the window was locked. Just as she was about to turn away, I blurted out, unable to contain the question that had lodged itself in my throat. "Grandma, have you ever seen it?" She paused for a few moments, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face before a reassuring smile crept onto her lips. She didn't answer me. She simply leaned down and kissed my forehead, a gesture filled with a strange intensity. "Good night, darling," she whispered. Then, with a gentle click, she shut my door behind her. I was awake for most of that night, staring at the darkened window pane. The familiar silhouette of the woods outside now held a new kind of terror. I kept wondering if I would see that face. My grandma described a face with multiple eyes staring back at me. Eventually, exhausted from fear and lack of sleep, my eyelids drifted shut, and I finally drifted off. While I slept, I dreamt of his form shifting and writhing in the darkness. I ran, my legs pumping, but it was like I was running on ice. Panic seized me as the figure lunged, its long arms wrapping around my legs. It dragged me, a rag doll, through the grass, the stench of damp grass filling my nostrils. The woods grew bigger as the thing dragged me there, its jagged edges threatening to devour me whole. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Just as the branches of the trees were about to engulf me, I jolted awake, gasping for breath. Light streamed through the window, painting familiar shapes on the ceiling. The room held a peaceful stillness. It took several deep breaths to slow the pounding of my heart. Relief washed over me, chasing away the lingering dread. Since that night, despite Grandma's steady stream of new stories, the creature in the woods has remained a constant shadow in the corner of my mind. Thankfully, the nightmares, those terrifying chases through endless woods, didn't last. Slowly, the story faded from memory. A few years later, a different kind of darkness descended upon our family. Cancer, a cruel, selfish thief, stole my grandmother's health bit by bit. She fought for months, but in the end, the disease won. It left a hole in our lives, especially for Grandpa. Now, he lives alone, the silence of the house heavy with her absence. Talking about her seems to bring a fresh wave of pain, etched deep into the lines on his face. Sometimes, he murmurs about just waiting for his turn to join her. It's a heartbreaking sight. A man transformed into a solitary figure, simply waiting to die. That year was a blur of grief, a dark tunnel we all had to navigate. But with the love and support of family and friends, we eventually managed to pull through. With each passing year, the grief lessened, but Grandma's memory remained. Then, after another few years, during my senior year in high school, something happened. I walked into the house after a long day. The familiar scent of an empty house greeted me. Mom had already left for work. Pulling my backpack onto my bed, I pulled out my books and settled in for an evening of homework, studying, and the occasional break to watch TV. I shut off the TV, changed into my pajamas, and crawled into bed. Sleep, however, remained elusive. My mind was a tangled mess, tossing and turning over the events of the day. Finally, I peeked at the clock on my desk, its green glow reading almost 3 a.m. Just then, a sound shattered the silence, a sharp tap that echoed through the room. My eyes flew open, snapping towards the window. A wave of ice washed over me, freezing my blood solid. Memories of Grandma's story flooded back the creature, the woods. There, pressed against the glass, was a form that blocked most of the moonlight from filtering in. If not for the sliver of moonlight peeking in around what was blocking it, I wouldn't have been able to see it at all. Its human-shaped body pressed against the window, and across its head, I could have sworn I saw movement, a flicker, like multiple tiny insects scurrying across its flesh. Then, a horrifying realization dawned on me. They weren't insects. They were eyelids. Eyelids flickering open and shut, scanning my room with frantic urgency. My breath hitched. Was this a dream? Just then, a shadowy limb, long and impossibly thin, snaked out towards the base of my window. Had I locked the window? The sickening sound of the window as the glass began to slide up hit my ears. Terror choked and screamed in my throat. There are woods behind my mom's house too, and a sickening realization dawned on me. This wasn't just a story, it was real and it was here. Adrenaline surged through me, and my flight or fight responses kicked in. I threw myself out of bed in a desperate scramble. My feet pounded the floor as I bolted towards the door, flinging it open, but my escape was cut short. The door slammed shut in my face, the force of it throwing me backward. A strangled cry escaped my lips as a wave of terror washed over me. My body locked up, and every muscle seized in a silent scream. Somehow, it was now in my room, that fast. It was no longer at the window. It was now above me, above my door. One of its grotesquely long limbs, tipped with a hand like a spider's claw, pressed firmly against the door, pinning me inside. Another seemed contorted at an unnatural angle. Its fingers splayed against the wall in a grotesque parody of a grip. The head, if you could call it that, twisted on its neck in a way that defied human anatomy, almost spinning completely around. A chorus of eyes locked onto me. Trapped and alone, I stumbled back, my mind scrambling for any flicker of hope. The second floor was an escape route, but a leap out the window would likely result in injury, leaving me in a vulnerable position. Besides, that's where it probably wanted me. Right next to the door stood my wooden baseball bat. In a desperate lunge, I grabbed it, the wood rough against my grip. With a yell, I swung the bat with all my strength, connecting with a sickening thud. Splinters of wood rained down as the impact sent a tremor through the room. The creature recoiled slightly, its multiple eyes flickering in what might have been surprise. But the silence that followed was the most unsettling part. No roar of pain, no growl. This thing moved with an unnatural quiet. Even as it moved, it made no noise. It descended to the floor, its grotesque form dwarfing the space in my room. As it loomed closer, lowering its body in a predatory crouch, I swung the mangled bat wildly. The bat connected with a bone-crunching impact, sending more shards of wood flying through the air. The creature recoiled, its grotesque form momentarily faltering. Seizing my chance, I bolted past the thing, flung open the bedroom door, and slammed it shut behind me with a resounding bang. Adrenaline pumping, I raced down the stairs, each step echoing in the sudden silence. Reaching the living room, I fumbled for the light switch, illuminating the space with a warm glow. Panting, I gripped the broken bat like a lifeline. Its splintered end pointed towards the top of the stairs, towards the thing in my room. Suddenly, a new sound pierced the tense silence, the creak of the front door opening. A silhouette emerged from the doorway, the dim porch light casting long shadows across her face. "There you are," my mom's voice laced with exhaustion. "What the hell are you?" The sentence died on her lips, completely cut short. Her eyes widened, but neither she nor I had time to react. In a sharp and quick moment, a shadowy, distorted limb, tipped with a spidery claw, shot out, wrapping around my mother's waist. It snagged her, sinking its talons deep into her flesh, a sickening tear echoing in the sudden silence. A strangled noise bubbled in her throat, cut short before it could form a scream. But then, I heard her scream fully formed as the thing dragged her away to the woods. I ran with all my effort, but the thing was fast, too fast. All I could do was keep running, watching, as my mom screamed with her arms folded around the creature's arm in a desperate attempt to escape. It had her, though, exactly where it wanted her, out in the open. I fell face first into the grass, a sob wrenching its way out of my chest. Warm tears streamed down my face, blurring my vision as I watched in horror. Mom's screams turned into blood-curdling shrieks, fading into a horrifying silence as they disappeared into the indistinguishable maw of the woods. The police came, but what could they do? What could I tell them? I told them exactly what I saw. They looked at me like I was crazy, but what else could I say? For hours, I sat in a sterile interrogation room, the harsh overhead light blurring my vision. They questioned me over and over, dissecting my story, searching for inconsistencies. But all I could do was repeat the horrifying scene, my voice cracking with each retelling. There was no evidence to tie me to my mom's disappearance, nothing but my frantic pleas and the raw terror etched onto my face. Finally, they seemed to reach a reluctant roadblock. With a sigh and a dismissive glance, they released me. Now, a search party combs the backyard, venturing into the dense woods behind our house. Bloodhounds sniff the damp earth, their mournful howls echoing through the trees. In my room, the silence pressing down on me like a physical weight. As the harsh light of dawn breaks, I stare at the window. A large handprint, a grotesque, splayed imprint of multiple fingers clings to the outside of the glass. A cold realization settles over me. Now I know that at least one of my grandma's stories is real.